I've been asked to stand in for Professor Sharif Hassim for this session. We've got two papers. The first one is by Hussein Njosi, who's a PhD fellow at SWAP, and the second paper is by Asanda Benya, who's also a PhD fellow at SWAP. So without wasting too much time, I will ask Hussein to start.
Thank you very much. Hello? Hello? Okay. Thank you, Jacob, and greetings to everybody. I'm just going to shoot straight to my presentation. Can I remove this? Can you stop the clock? So I'm hoping that there are no point of orders and all those things here. I'm just going to speak and finish. On the 11th of February, 1990, student activists from the ANC-linked student organization, the Congress of South African Students, known by its acronym COSAS, received information that F.W. de Klerk released Nelson Mandela from 27 years of imprisonment. This was the branch of Sasolburg Zamdela Secondary School named Nkgopoleng. On the 12th, it was a Monday, normal school day, the branch leadership asked the school management to allow them to announce to the assembly that Mandela had been released. Sabata Lebone, one of the members of COSAS, and who had also briefed the branch executive committee about this a few days before, took platform on the school assembly and asked the rendering of Nkosi Sikelel. At the end of the song, he shouted, "Nelson Mandela Ulukululuti," which means Mandela has been released. All students broke into ululation, song, marched throughout the small township of Sasolburg Zamdela, singing songs like "Umandela Uzobusa." School was interrupted and all other schools followed suit as Nkgopoleng Secondary School students marched to all schools and converged, everyone at one point, the filling station at the entrance of Zamdela. Some forcefully took buses with the intention to go to Soweto, where it was said Mandela will be addressing. This is one high school in one township, but everywhere in the country, people took to the streets celebrating the release of Mandela. This release was a mark of significant change that was to sweep the country into a political pact that saw the white minority racist regime transferred for an inclusive political democratic South Africa. Here, in this high school, were politically conscious black youth activists to whom the event spoke volumes and probably strengthened their confidence in their own political activism. At this stage of the anti-colonial struggle, the school, as a technology and site of colonial sociability, had occupied the center. To be specific, this was the apartheid school, the school for blacks in a system of racial segregation whose basic modus operandi is about white domination, privilege, and supremacy. Very few political events with meaningful impact within the black community since the advent of mass education as inaugurated by the Bantu Education Act of '53 took place without the contribution of the school-going population. From the past boycotts of the 50s, which resulted in Sharpeville massacre, the school boycotts that fought against the introduction of Bantu education, to the '76 Soweto uprising, and the theaters of the social movements of the '80s, of rent, raids, boycotts of tricameral parliament, demands for better wages and better school conditions. The school population increasingly became central to the liberation politics. There's no doubt that the black youth politics as well spread across the country with this advent of mass education. There emerged a collective political subject, the black youth, which became a political phenomena of great proportions. The apartheid school was the site of the generation and regeneration of this collective subject. For instance, the Val Uprising of '84 involved 93,000 pupils who stayed away from school, including 60% of workers in that area, which was part of a broader political program that carried education, residential, and worker demands. This event, the Val Uprising, left 60 people dead and resulted in widespread solidarity boycotts in the PWV areas. Unlike universities, the school is located within the township. It forms part of the architectural outlook of the township, and thus its life forms. To the school is also bestowed the parental responsibility over children. In fact, Lodge argues that part of the reasons why many parents were receptive to Bantu education, to Bantu schools in the 1950s, the mass education was due. It was due to the fact that it was going to take care of their children whilst they were at work. Nevertheless, no other institutions, not the prisons, not the hospitals, not the universities, housed so many black people in one institutional form than the apartheid schools. According to the Race Relations Survey, the school-going population stood at 5.5 million for Africans located in 16,745 primary and high schools in homelands and urban townships in the year 1983. The number of African school children had increased from about 800,000 in the 1950s to over 5 million. In 84, they say in African schools, teachers were about 129,822. This must tell us how critical the apartheid school was, both in terms of population control and socialization. My efforts in demonstrating these numbers is to underscore the colonial question that I'm concerned with. The most critical thing about the colonial thesis, with all its historical evolution, is that colonization is about securing white privilege and supremacy. Core to colonization is the idea, as Mbembe puts it, of distributing risk, the ultimate of which is death, meaning the form of power that is colonial has to do with the distribution, not with the distribution of life, but of risk, risky jobs, risky living conditions, where risk is reserved for the native population. The blacks are ruled this way as those to whom society's risks must be reserved for them. Colonization does this because of its basic assumption about the humanity of the African natives. That is, Africans are in perpetual atavism. If René Descartes' interpretation of what happened about the scientific revolution is true, that is, humanity rediscovered itself as autonomous to God or nature, thus the foundation of its existence had to be consciousness of consciousness. In the classical cogito ergo sum, then the Africans under the Dutch East Indian Company and ultimately the European colonizers are incapable, under their rule, are incapable of this consciousness of consciousness. They are incapable and of the self-reflexive autonomous subject of modernity to whom law or that which rules over them must seek their consent or legitimacy. In this spectacular supersonic civilization, characterized by permanent revolutions of industry and technology, where all that is solid always melts into air, the African native is the responsibility of the colonizer. The African forms part of things, the natural things upon which the colonizer must rule, civilize, develop. This is the mission divinely bestowed to them by universal reason. Therefore, that which rules over the natives must be superimposed because natives do not know what is good for themselves. The native is not the subject of modernity in the Cartesian sense. In the terms of the Western modernity, school is supposed to create the modern subject to the extent that is the subject with a self that knows itself and that relate with and define itself outside relations like the family, ethnicity, group, or nation. It is the reason Foucault included it as part of the institutions that flow from the panopticon, signifying the transformation of how power relates to subjects of rule. For Foucault, the school, in particular mass schooling, signifies the disciplinary society alongside hospitals and prison. But in the colony, the apartheid school is part of the colonial economy of power to maintain white privilege and supremacy. It is the single most important institution of socialization which admits blacks as children, inculcates their place in society without even having to point out that reality. So the apartheid school is therefore the production site for those to whom law is superimposed. If school is about the preparation of the citizens of modernity, the democratic subject with consciousness of consciousness, the Bantu school is used to do the opposite, to prepare the native as the object and not the subject of law. It is the locomotive of the regeneration of permanent juniorization of the native population in its materiality and pedagogy. All I'm doing is to account for the qualifier Bantu in school because I'm interested in decolonization in my reading of Black Youth Politics. The emergence of Black Youth Politics out of this platform is phenomenal and must be assessed in light of this reality. about what the apartheid school means. My main question is therefore to find what tools did the black youth use, in what ways to reconstitute themselves as politically conscious subjects in a school perceived this way. How was a collective subject that confronted the injustice of apartheid across the country and mobilized society performed in this one school? Using life history interviews with student activists, the teachers, the principals, the school archives, I try to craft the lived experience and the everydayness of these activists. Mkhopoleng Secondary is the first school in Zamdele, but not the first school in the township. It's the first secondary school. The first school would be a primary school, as all of us know. It was opened in 1977, built by Sasol firm. It is a Zamdela school for Bantu people in a township that was thoroughly planned by apartheid, built around the industrial activities of the chemical industrial pride of the regime, Sasol firm. Like all Bantu schools, it is U-shaped, with classrooms facing each other in two parallel lines in the principal's office at the head facing them. This is the architecture of surveillance which must in turn produce self-conduct. The principal's office faces both the two rows of classrooms facing each other, but also the gate, the main entrance to the school, so that the gaze of authority achieves a double purpose. The school later added more classes, a library, a science lab, but they were built in a parallel form as well, following the buildings that had already existed. The student toilets are a bit secluded, a few meters from the classrooms building complexes, and create a platform of an escape from the gaze. The teachers' toilets are, however, attached to the school principal together with the staff room. Okay, the toilets, I'm not going to be able to explain to you the significance of the description around toilets, but everything else we might be able to cover. Mkhopoleng students wear uniform, blue t-shirts, blue-grey pants, whilst others black pants, but also black shoes. The school gate closes and opens according to a timetable in the morning, lunchtime, when the school day is done. Arriving late or not wearing proper uniform is considered ill-discipline. Injunctions are punishable with lashes, corporal punishment. Injunctions vary from noise making, not doing homework, not wearing school uniform, not arriving on time, or even failing. The students are divided according to grades, or this is called at this stage standards, but also standards are according to ages. It is, as Bourdieu puts it, a class community par excellence. Age segregation is essentially the very management of generation and generational continuity. Population age restriction is very crucial to the functioning of the apartheid school. It is also the place of multiple assessments, evaluations, grading, with the teacher at the center of determining who passes and fails. The process is at the same time an individualizing process, with everything aimed at the ability of the students growing, owning up to their actions, their passing, their failing, their percentage of the mark, their exercise book, exam scripts. The sports and cultural activities may be like collective parts, but what makes the school is the individual assessment. The evaluation that matters, that will make you go to the next grade, is the assessment. This is the preparation, again, of subjects of labor. The modern labor, which is about, assembly lines, timetables, uniforms, wages, but it is more than that. Natives are in the process of permanent juniorization. The school has an assembly each Monday and Friday of the week where all teachers, students, and the principal gather in the morning. The assembly is very ceremonious. They sing, they pray, and they receive the principal's address. Teachers are selected to lead the prayer, but at times they get the priest. This is where the release of Mandela was announced, an event which spoke volumes beyond Mkhopoleng. However, here in this schoolyard, as I indicated, was a generation of young people who had to form part of the first violent gangs in the township, the first underground units of the ANC, the builders of the youth movement, the builders of the branches of the PAC and the ANC and the SACP following the unbanning. Here, they were experimenting with their political identities, testing their convictions against power, represented by the school management, but ultimately by the system of apartheid rule itself. Two organizations dominated this school, COSAS and Azazim. Azazim is short for Azanian Student Movement. COSAS was explicitly Freedom Charter embracing, whilst the Azanian Student Movement rejected the charter and embraced the political ideology of black consciousness. In campus, this is how the divisions are understood, at least until 1992. This school had been dominated by Azazim in terms of the organization that had the popular confidence of students, winning all student representative councils in the 1980s. Azazim was the first to arrive in Nkhuphuleni in 1984. It got formed following the uprising. COSAS arrived the next year. Cultural and political capital in school was always based on who could better articulate themselves and do so in fine English. However, the ability to debate, in fact, debating contest was the single most important determiner of who is likely to take the SRC. Three important challenges that form the central agenda of student activists in this school. One, school fees for transports, for sporting activities, for extramural activities. Two was corporal punishment and the sexual policing of teachers. Third, it was the struggle to have democratically elected student bodies. There was always a project, as we all know, within progressive movements in South Africa to have free quality education. At times in Nkhuphuleni, students would raise the question so sharply that it frustrated teachers. The manner of engagement of Azazim often relied on an intellectual discombobulation of the teachers. They so prided themselves of winning in terms of negotiations, where they put teachers down through show of superior logic and information. One teacher tells of a discussion where they raised over what really constituted the price of tuition fees. They asked how the school arrived at this price, demanding a proper breakdown of the budget. They asked how much was for books, how much was for maintenance, etc. And the teacher says they had never thought of it that way. It forced them as the management to plan carefully. They add that Azazim students often shocked them of how much they knew about the country, the continent, and the world. He says, finally, when the fee was eradicated, students then demanded to be paid back all the money they'd be paying for. Azazim also housed great debaters with impeccable oratory skills who liked reading a lot. For him, this teacher, with Azazim, you always had to know your story, and they would embarrass you as a teacher. In many ways, this is part of what began to erode the authority of the Bantu teacher, their incapacity to deal with the critical student. The Bantu teacher comes out of the training that uses what was called fundamental pedagogics, which assumes a suspicious perception on the child as not good. The child is born a sinner, born a delinquent. The child is an aberration. Teaching is about transmissions and enforcing discipline with corporal punishment at the center of correcting injunctions. The demand for SRCs in this school was not met with too much resistance, and students simply conducted these activities for themselves. They would ask the teacher to come and preside. Elections were preceded by a debate for each portfolio of the 15-member cabinet. The school had a strong debating culture and team which used to contest in other schools, like sports competitions. Debates attracted a lot of participation from schools. And this is why the debate for elections of SRCs gained a lot of numbers from the students. The contest of COSAS and Azazim was a blood sport of exchanging ideas. Each group would convince students that as a collective they must have a say in how they are being educated. And this is the central thesis of that struggle of COSAS, to have democratically elected SRCs. We want to have a say in how we are educated. And they will fight for consultation on all matters, including making sure that the school fees, sports fees, and the concerts are free. You know how the election goes. They would battle the ideas of the Freedom Charter. In particular, South Africa belongs to all who live in it. Azazim disagrees. Next door to Nkhuphuleni was a church. Opposite to Nkhuphuleni were shops, and each day these shops would receive deliveries from bakeries, soft food, milk, and so on and so forth. And following the 1984 Val Uprising, which used strategy of looting goods as part of the eroding of apartheid activity, each time a truck carrying deliveries would arrive in Zamdela, to these shops, students would immediately leave their classes and loot it. It is critical to understand that the political movement on the demands for better education, rents, rates, and authorities eroded the authority of the school management as well as teachers. But the authority of the teacher was itself vulnerable. In Nkhuphuleni, most teachers were underqualified And even those who were qualified were not taught to deal with the critical students, and the activists began to see through this. So if students are critical and they question power, the Bantu teacher was not trained to deal with that. It is the teachers often responded with corporal punishment.